Hi folks, change of scenery. um, I've made a video or two in the past year or so talking about how something's not quite right with my life, trying to come to terms with it. I'm still working through some stuff, but I feel it's coming to a close shortly, because I think I've identified what the real problem has been with me over the past couple of years. And it all has to do with the death of my dad. 3 years ago, my dad died in a road traffic accident. My mother had died many years previous. So, my dad inherited all my mum's stuff. So he didn't have to do anything about any of that stuff because he lived in the same house and he continued to live in the same house. So it all pretty much just stayed where mum left it until he died. So then, as well as coping with the grief, coming to terms with that, I inherit everything, because I'm an only child, right? I inherit everything that two individuals have accumulated throughout their entire lives. It all comes to me. And it's not like I'm really looking for any of it. It just becomes my responsibility to deal with. Add to this the fact that I don't have a family of my own. I'm a single guy. Single guy, only child, no partner, no kids, no mum, no dad. I have a couple of aunts and uncles, a couple of close friends. So, dealing with this solo has been tough, and I attacked it head on when it first happened. I had to deal with all of the admin of my dad's life and stuff like, he threw bank statements out. I had to deal with getting his bank account closed, and he threw the bank statements out. He hadn't been correctly paying his tax. He had been ignoring letters, and I had to deal with this. So anyway, I got granted probate through the courts. I know you normally use a solicitor for that, but my dad's financial affairs weren't very complicated really, so I did it myself, which also meant that I could be thorough about it. And it was a real task for about a month or a month and a half, but a real breath of relief when I got it done. Except for the house. He owned his house. And I inherited the house. It was fully paid for. I have my own house here as well, which is just about fully paid for. So for the most part, I let his house sit. I let it sit unoccupied, full of stuff, full of all that stuff that my mum and dad had accumulated, because it was just easier to put it out of mind. Now, thankfully, thanks especially to a really supportive friend who loaned me a trailer and helped me out. We got rid of a load of stuff at one point, and at various times I've given things away. I've sold a few things, some ornamental things that my mum owned that were valuable, but for the most part things have gone to charity shops. So it's such a hard task too, because that was the house that I grew up in. And it's now a ghost house. Ghost house in the sense that it's just an empty shell of what it once was. Almost everything's gone from it now. The task of getting it to that point has been so hard, because it's like I'm killing the house. I'm gradually killing a house that is so full of memories that I have made with my parents from early childhood right through to about age 30. I know that's pretty late for a guy to leave home, but that's the way it was. So every piece of that house I dismantle, everything I give away, turns it more and more into that shell, destroys that shrine to my memories. But I know it has to be done. It's just hard. And it's hard doing it on your own. And this has been the shadow over my life, really, over the past 3 years. So finally, last week there, I finally got the property listed with an estate agency, and hopefully it will sell. The money isn't really all that important to me, although I don't want to be stupid about it either. It's just I need the weight of this thing lifted off me. So I've been thinking a lot about this idea that wealth and possessions become burdensome when you've got too many of them, especially. I've gone through phases in my life where I buy a lot of stuff, and then I find myself becoming dissatisfied, and I want to become a bit more minimalist in the way that I live, and I'll go onto eBay and sell a load of stuff, and this kind of comes and goes with me. But there definitely is something to the notion that possessions are burdensome. I wouldn't say that wealth in the sense of the numbers in your bank account, I wouldn't say that that's burdensome. Not, it's fine to have a few extra zeros there. It gives you a sense of security that you're not going to end up on the street. It also gives you the opportunity to do certain things that you may not have otherwise been able to do. Not necessarily even selfish things. Maybe there's something charitable that you want to do. That's all an option. Whatever motivates you, whatever makes you feel satisfied. But possessions are another thing. Possessions are just clutter. I'll always remember this line from the TV series Sapphire and Steel. Overseas viewers will not have heard of Sapphire and Steel, and no one under 40 will have heard of it either. It was this old sci-fi TV series about these interdimensional detectives that would appear. They would appear on Earth to deal with disruptions in time by these entities that were trying to break into time. It was very weird. So they arrived in this old house, and Steele was walking around, and he's played by your guy McCallum, David McCallum, yeah, and Sapphire is Joanna Lumley. And Steele walks around and he looks at this house full of all these clocks, full of all this clutter, and he just remarks about humans. They do clutter their lives. I always remember that because it just seems so true. We clutter our lives, and then the clutter becomes burdensome to us. So the solution is, of course, don't clutter your life. Don't clutter it up. So, yeah, I was watching a pretty inspiring YouTube video there about a guy who, straight out of university, he got a high-paying government job, but it was a job that he hated. It was a job that had massive hours, but it did give him an awful lot of money. And he bought a house and he filled it up full of things, and he wasn't happy. And he sold the house and he bought a condo and he filled it full of things, and he wasn't happy. And then he went to this retreat, which I think was some kind of Buddhist retreat, for a couple of weeks. And during that time he did a lot of soul searching, and he made the radical decision of quitting a job, getting employed part-time at a grocer's, so he had much more free time, selling his house, buying a small apartment, and selling his car and getting around by bicycle. And he was happy. He became an awful lot happier. Happiness is to a large extent a psychological thing, but I think it is true that circumstances to an extent do dictate your happiness. My circumstances are affecting my happiness, there's no doubt about it, have been for the past 3 years. To an extent I can change how I think about that, but the real solution is just to deal with the problem, which is get rid of all this stuff, get rid of this house, not this house, my dad's house. So yeah, I'm essentially looking forward to next year. I'm looking forward to getting this house out of the way. I'm looking forward to my book coming out and seeing what sort of opportunities that might provide me. The thing that I've been thinking about a lot, the psychological stress that this puts upon me, and I know it's small stuff compared to what some people go through, it really is, but it's real nevertheless. Poor people look at wealthy people and they go, "What are you talking about? You don't have any problems." And it may be true that they don't have problems to the same extent, but every circumstance of life really has its own set of problems unique to that circumstance. There's the old story about, rich kids who appear to have everything, and yet they may have parents who are really not giving them any attention, who are working their asses off, and in order to compensate for the fact that they're not giving attention to their children, they give their children a lot of gifts. So on the surface it looks like the kids have everything, but a poor child who has its parents' attention probably has a whole lot more of a richer experience of life than the kid who has all the gadgets and the toys. You see what I mean? It's not all black and white. So in coping with my situation, doing a lot of soul searching about how best to reflect, and because I'm all about improving consciousness, that's kind of what I'm all about. So how do I best improve my consciousness in this sort of situation? And I find, oddly enough, that the thing that helps me is not the sort of insights that you get from the typical spiritual community, which talks about accepting what is, living in the now, and all that sort of stuff. While there may be some value in those kinds of outlooks, the way that works for me psychologically is the approach of the adversary. Okay? Our old pal Satan, mythologically understood, not literally understood. It's very easy, when you're into spirituality, a lot of spirituality and a lot of religion is really an attempt to rid oneself of suffering. But this carries a subtle error. I was looking for the right word there. A subtle error in that somehow life ought to be free from suffering, ought to be free from adversity, hostility. But that's the thing. There is nothing aberrant about the idea that life brings hostility. Because it brings hostility for the gazelle who is chased by the lion, doesn't it? Hostility is everywhere throughout the animal kingdom. Hostility is right there in chemical reactions. Hostility is right there in asteroids colliding with planets. Everything bangs into everything. Energy is transformed through consumption. The evolutionary development of the human organism was only possible with a massive amount of bloodshed. As when you think about how the evolutionary process worked, a mutation occurs. If the mutation is good enough to survive, it gets to thrive and become dominant and reproduce itself. All of the mutations that fail die out. Think of how many thousands of mutations, more than thousands maybe, must have happened to eventually build the human organism from something that was very, very simple in the beginning. I think thousands is probably highly inaccurate. It's more like millions of mutations. And think of all the millions of mutations that failed and had to die out so that this one would succeed and thrive. And that's true for every other animal organism and plant. So leave out the fluffy spirituality. You are never, ever going to get rid of this adversarial principle that exists in nature. And that's what the whole satanic thing is about for me. It's not about anything more than that. It's not about embracing the entire philosophy of Anton LaVey or any other person who calls himself a Satanist. It's just understanding that underneath all the cooperation that we see and the civilization that we see is this principle of hostility that is not a fall from grace, not something that doesn't belong in nature. It's all part of how this works. So, let's not forget that in our day-to-day lives. We've become so civilized that for the most part, nobody really gets into fights anymore, physically, right? But warfare still exists right here. Even the Christian would acknowledge this. They call it spiritual warfare. Unfortunately, they think of the devils and the demons as literal things, whereas they're really mythical depictions of mental struggles that the mind goes through. So I'm going through a mental struggle. So the best way for me to face that is to think of it as psychological or spiritual warfare. In other words, to be aggressive about it, to not let it get on top of me. And what I mean by that in practical terms is, when I know that I need to go round to my dad's house, which is empty and cold and this ghost house that I do not want to go anywhere near, when I know that I have to go there and do something, such as move another piece of furniture, turn on the heating for a while, just to keep the damp out, or for some other reason, if I have to go there and I don't want to, I should damn well force myself to go there. Instead of going, oh, this just makes me feel bad. I want to turn on the television and not feel bad anymore and just sedate myself. See? In practical terms, that's what being the adversary means. And I find that when I remind myself of that, when I remind myself of the fact that there's nothing wrong with having this kind of struggle, this is just all part of life. It's not about being free from suffering. It's about how you handle the suffering. It's how you handle the adversity. That makes me feel much more empowered. Far more empowered than all the fluffy spirituality that is trying to tell you that it's all about love and it's all about being all serene and achieving some kind of lasting peace of mind that is never interrupted, and all that other nonsense. You know, if you look at Eckhart Tolle, for instance, the way he projects that persona like he could never be disturbed by anything. That's an act. That is an act. He's basically, he's a guru type. He's a spiritual superstar. This is his business. And he has some legitimate insights to share, but it's also a cult of personality and a money-making racket. I got to be careful what I say because I got this book coming out as well. But I don't want to be anything more than an authentic human being who shares things from his own life in the hope that they may be helpful to other people who are experiencing similar struggles. Alright folks, talk to you later. Take care.